Some may not know this, but #MeToo was started by a Black woman. This movement to encourage women to come forward and identify sexual harassers was founded by civil rights activist Tarana Burke 10 years ago, before it became a social media hashtag. But Black women have been instrumental in bringing sexual harassment to the forefront. #MeToo began even earlier with Michelle Vincent, a Black woman who in 1986 won a landmark Supreme Court case against the bank manager who had sexually assaulted her and the bank merited savings that did nothing to protect her. MeToo has inspired women across the country and in every walk of life to call out their abusers, whether it's Olympic gold-winning medalist Michaela Maroney to award-winning actress Selma Hayek. And now the MeToo movement has made a stand at our state capitol. Women who have worked for the state government in Annapolis have come forward and made allegations of sexual harassment with the support of the organization Not Without Black Women. My guests are Brittany Oliver, a women's rights activist and director of the social justice organization Not Without Black Women, Delegate Angela Angel, and Nina Smith, a communications consultant and former Annapolis staffer. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Now, Brittany, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, African American women experience sexual harassment and sexual violence at a 35% higher rate than their white counterparts. And this number goes up if the woman is poor or transgendered or suffers from mental illness. How is the MeToo movement dealing with these kind of disparities?
So I think with the MeToo movement, it started, from what it looks like, it started in Hollywood, right? Where there were women in Hollywood who were experiencing issues with sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And so I think what MeToo nationally has done is it's giving local communities an opportunity to have further discussions about the disparities that are taking place, while the issue at hand is not new, because there are women and advocates and activists who have been talking about this issue for a really long time. And so I think what's happening right now is that this is a time where women are saying enough is enough. And so now it's starting to hit close to home.
Could you describe what rape culture is and how it affects women?
So rape culture is it's basically a term that puts experiences, brings the women's experiences to life about what they experience on sometimes a day-to-day basis, whether it be at home, whether it's at work, maybe in the street, in public space. But rape culture is a system where sexual abuse and harassment, so inappropriate touching, sexual comments, groping, any sort of sexual unwanted behavior that women face on a daily basis. And so what makes it a culture is that there are people who are complacent within the system. And so being silent about it and not speaking up for women and other types, because survivors there are all types of survivors, but specifically this issue impacts women, especially Black women. And so what makes it a culture is that it's ingrained, it's embedded into our systems. It perpetuates structural and institutionalized sexism, and which prohibits women from being able to have a place to report the abuse and harassment that they're facing. So it's the same thing as any other form of oppression that we're resisting. I think that MeToo has provided an opportunity to have more of these conversations.
Do you think there are special issues that Black women face when addressing rape culture? I know from my experience that Black women often feel they have to remain silent in order to protect Black men, to make sure they're not put into an unjust criminal justice system. Do you see any differences in the way Black women have to approach this?
Definitely. As a Black woman myself, I think that, so I've been working on issues surrounding around rape culture for a long time. I think that it's in my own experience, it's different now because I'm addressing my own people, I'm addressing Black people. And so the pressure, the stakes are high, right? Black women's issues are very intersectional. We deal with not only race issues, but also gender and ageism and intersectionality, the term that was coined. I think at this point, Black women advocating on these issues is a risk. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And so Black women's issues are very intersectional. We deal with race, class, gender, ageism, a number of issues. These issues for us are not siloed. Our identities matter a great deal in how the world treats us. And so when we're talking about rape culture, in particular with Black women, I personally feel like it's for myself and other Black women I know that this is a risk. Black women talking about issues surrounding rape culture is a risk.
Right.
And if I could, I'll also add that, you know, that risk and that kind of pressure point, I think, is also forcing us to speak up, right? You know, unfortunately, you know, white women kind of opened up this conversation on a popular level, right? And though we've been advocating per usual on these issues, they expanded that platform and they opened up more opportunities at an acceptable level, unfortunately. And I think that's what is so distinct and powerful about this movement and what's kind of happened, right? It's reinforced the fact that we still have a lot of ingrained stereotypes and bias towards women of color, particularly Black women. We're not listening to them, we're not believing them, right? And so I think we're recognizing, even in the Black Lives Matter movement, and you're kind of seeing women at the forefront of that movement, that, you know, and having Tarana Burke actually uplifted and people acknowledging that she started this has been really, really important because, you know, that risk, us being exposed. Anita Hill before tried this and it did not work. She was vilified. You know, I think now we feel there's a little bit more safety, though there is still the Black backlash that comes with it. I mean, even in our advocacy in Maryland, we faced a little bit of backlash because we weren't naming names. And for us, even naming names would so detract because we're usually not believed. They usually won't listen to us and they focus more on our history rather than the behavior itself and what it's doing to impact the people involved. And so it's just, I think now is the moment where we feel like actually we can kind of strike that balance and lean in and see what we can do to make some real strategic gains.
You know, I think it's really interesting that you brought up Anita Hill because in 1991 she made very credible allegations, yes, and then a nominee for the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, and even he became a Supreme Court justice. Yes. Mm-hmm. So are you concerned at all that the MeToo movement is going to have that kind of setback, that kind of very public, very hurtful kind of setback?
I mean, you know, I think folks experience those setbacks every day when they're encountering this behavior. You know, what I think is important is, and for me, the reason why I came forward was this real issue around consent and respect. And, you know, the fact that we refuse, I don't know why as a society that we haven't really had these conversations before. I remember when Anita Hill testified and I remember the reactions to her. And it's ingrained in my memory, and I was only 10 years old at the time, you know? Those issues and the way we're perceived, again, factors so much into this conversation, particularly, again, around consent, because, you know, it's about basic respect, and a lot of times, I think it was Malcolm X who said the Black woman in America is one of the most disrespected.
Right, absolutely. You know, and look how little has changed. You know, Black women aren't often considered credible witnesses. Yes. I know in the case of Daniel Holtzclaw, who was a police officer who targeted poor African-American women for his sexual assaults because he knew they wouldn't be considered credible witnesses. So unfortunately, that is just as true today as it was when he said it so many years ago. Delegate Angel, let me ask you a question. How do you think MeToo is different for Black women?
You know, I think it's like both Brittany and Nina said. For Black women, we have to balance a lot of different things, and it's not just about intersectionality. It's about who we are. For us, when we speak out against some of the things that have happened to us, we risk not only not being believed, but we also have to balance whether or not in us speaking out and not being believed, we take into consideration, does it dilute the movement? Right. Does it dilute progress? Because I think a lot of Black women, when we do things, we think of it communally. You know, yes, that's one of the reasons why, you know, movements live and die by what we do, because that's how we move. You know, I think there's also a factor of we also balance, you know, when we speak out against someone who has harmed us or who's doing these behaviors, you know, when they are a man of importance, right? When they are doing some good things, what the blowback will be on us, because it will be said, oh, you know, this particular person, this man was going places, he was doing things for the community, and, you know, you brought him down. So as Black women, we balance the fact of, okay, if a powerful man has done something against us, we take into consideration the fact that if we speak out against him, if we actually do name them, you know, what many in the community will turn and say is that you've brought down this man who was helping us. You know, when things started to happen in Annapolis and people, you know, there was very widely known a letter. I didn't sign on to it. And the letter, when people were talking about it, they said, well, we want to make sure that people know that we're doing good work here. And I thought that was, you know, one of the most asinine statements, because, you know, when you look at Harvey Weinstein, right? Harvey Weinstein made amazing movies, right? He's responsible for some of the best pictures in the past 2 decades.
Absolutely.
And he was a monster, and he was a predator. One doesn't make the other one not possible.
Right.
It can be possible that, you know, and that's what I said, it's very possible, and in fact a reality. We do great work in Annapolis. You know, we change bills, we change lives, we do great legislation. We also have predators there. Right. We have men that prey on staff and fellow legislators, and that they are known and they are not stopped. And we have women there that enable them and that cover their crimes. And it doesn't mean that we don't still have and do good work. And in some of the cases, it doesn't mean that even some of those men are responsible for doing still good legislation, because people are multifaceted. Right. And so one of the things I think also as Black women, we always take that into consideration because we're community minded. When people have asked, you know, us, and as Nina said, about naming people, you know, one of the things that we have blowback, and we know, and that's even been said to me, is that, well, you know, you have to think about also the good that's being done, you know, and that's hard, and that's a burden that we carry. I've been in many spaces where I'm the only Black woman, and I've also been now representing Prince George's County in a space where it's a majority Black county. Honestly, there are times when it feels safer in a space where I am more of a true minority, because then, one, people are more cautious, and there are also more safeguards. In a lot of the cases, when you find when people of power are targeting women, or when they're doing things to women, you'll find they're often doing it to women that are least protected when they're doing it. So if you have a Black person in power, they're targeting a Black woman, and they'll be completely different with some of the white women that are around them.
That's disturbing.
Because they know that there's a certain level of protection that those white women carry. You know, so when some of my legislators said, oh, I've never experienced this in Annapolis, I was thinking, well, there's a lot of reasons why you've never experienced this. But there was also some times when I had to say, the fact that you said you've never seen it, that's a lie. Because I've been in rooms where this has happened to me, and you've been there, and you've looked away, or you've just kind of acted as if you didn't see it. Don't tell me you've never seen this behavior, because that is a lie.
Wow. If it's okay, I'd like to follow up with asking you about your own experience with sexual harassment in Annapolis, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. You know, and some of it's come out. I mean, and I'll be honest, I think Nina and Brittany talked about it. It's not a safe space to really even fully speak about. I've received backlash from even, you know, from speaking about it to what I have. I've received backlash from standing up for myself and saying, if you do this again, I am going to let the world know. And if you do this again, if you allow it to be done, I'm going to report you. And, you know, I've received serious backlash over even taking that statement. And in Annapolis, backlash can be something as simple as, oh, well, now none of your bills are passing, right? And people will say,
that's, you know, huge.
Right.
That's huge. That's interfering with your ability to get your job done and to serve your constituents. Exactly.
But it's done in such a way, Annapolis can be manipulated in such a way where it can be very under the cover. You know, it can be, oh, well, we just didn't think it was a good bill. Oh, we just ran out of time. Oh, we added it on to this other bill, or we allowed, you know, someone else to put something in that was very similar to what you put in, and then they pass out the other person's legislation, and they don't pass out yours. Things happen where, you know, people that would usually help you and even fundraise, or now they're being told, you know, don't help that person. It comes in a variety of ways, and so it's very difficult. And because the public, I think, often isn't paying attention to a lot of the things that happen in Annapolis, because we're so close to DC, that a lot of things what happens in DC overshadows. Right. And so there's a lot of people that can hide, and a lot of misbehavior that happens. I had a bill which on the floor to show you how retaliation works. On the floor, when a bill reaches third reader, usually it's just passed. One time, and this wasn't dealing with harassment, but it was a way to put me in my place, I had a bill that every time it came up for third reader, a different senator stood up and said, I'd like to hold that bill. They don't have to give a reason. And I was texted and said, they're messing with your bill, Angela. They're not going to let your legislation pass. They did that all day until time ran out and the session ended and the legislation failed on third reader. And that happened in front of, it's public record. You can pull the votes, you can pull who did it. I won't name them because
Can you tell me a little bit about this bill?
Certainly, it was a very simple bill. It was a bill to revert name changes. Women who, and it wasn't just for women, but if you want to return to your maiden name after a divorce, especially if you're dealing with DV, there was a point where you had to file a whole onerous process. You had to put it in the newspaper, and so
domestic violence, just to be clear.
Yes, and so what my bill was, it was going to make name change more simple. You could just change it on a motion. You didn't have to publish it in the newspaper. You could just submit a motion saying, I'd like to return to my former name.
That seems very reasonable.
Very reasonable. It was, and the bill was voted out. People didn't have a problem with the bill. In 2016, the bill had went through, it was fine. It had gone through the House, it had gone through the Senate. Because I had stood up and stood against the House for an issue on domestic violence, to teach me a lesson, that bill reached the floor of the Senate and was killed. That's the way retaliation works in Annapolis. Now, if you were watching it, a lot of people saw that it was killed. They just thought, oh, we just ran out of time. Oh, they just kept special ordering the bill. But everyone in Annapolis understood that was teaching Angela a lesson. You don't step out of line.
Right. As a reporter looking from the outside, I wouldn't have known that this was some form of retaliation, that this was teaching you a lesson. I would have just assumed ran out of time. That's incredible.
Or that sometimes someone will say, well, I had a question on the bill. You didn't have a question, right? Yeah. The next year the bill sailed through, right? Because now I was back on my good behavior. That was the lesson learned. The bill went through. There were no questions. It was passed pretty early in session. And that's the way retaliation works.
Incredible.
And as I said, to be clear, because I don't want someone, that wasn't in retaliation for me reporting harassment, but it was just a way to illustrate this is how Annapolis works and how you can be retaliated in front of everyone, and yet you're not protected. So going back to my own experiences, having experienced that and understanding this is how it works, you're very much scared to report incidents.
Sure.
For me, it's, as simple as, the culture in Annapolis is very male dominated. It's, there's a lot of sexual jokes. There's a lot of, and there's this fine line that you have to walk because you don't want to be considered, too sensitive. There were times when I was ridiculed over the fact that I'm a single mom. There were, on the floor, and this is on the House floor where we're actually deciding legislation, where I was once called, oh, you're the baby mama legislator. In itself was not only, it was ridiculous, but it was also untrue. Because one of the reasons, and honestly, as a Black woman, as a single mother operating, one of the reasons why I never take up child care or child support issues is because I didn't want to be framed that way. Mm-hmm. So it was also just like completely out of context. One time I was told, someone said, oh, well, I'm going to call you Badu. I'm going to call you Erica Badu. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And this is on the floor. Men, women were sitting there. they heard. They said, because, you know, you always make the brothers call Tyrone. You're always trying to get a brother put out. And legislators chuckled. You know, there were men and women that heard. That time I actually did get an apology, because I will admit it was a point in session where I actually, it did make me, it's one of the few times that I've actually reacted, and I cried, and I'm not, you know, it was in part because I think it was an emotionally charged point in session. There's points in sessions where, you know, just everything is going so fast. But that time the legislator, a senior member, came to them and made them apologize to me because they saw that I was upset. So, you know, that was one of the few times that someone else did speak up for me, but many times it's just, you know, overlooked. Sometimes it's a joke and it's chuckled at. I've been physically grabbed, you know, where, you know, someone will say, you know, I've had someone say, you know, and has grabbed me. There's been times where I've gone up, you know, say there's colleagues talking, and, you know, someone will say, well, don't you see two men talking? And it's like, and you know, and it's, at some point it became so regular, like at one point in time when I would say that, if someone would say that to me, I would go, well, you know what, I don't, so I'm going to proceed with my question. But that was par for the course.
Incredible.
You know, and that's, you know, that's not including, you know, having, you know, your behind grabbed, you know, having someone reference to, you know, your body parts. And to be honest, there have been other women legislators and women staffers who have told me stories that are much worse, of being kissed, of being touched forcibly, of being assaulted, like their private parts, like through their clothes, or someone going up their skirt, of being, you know, grabbed, of all types of things that have happened to women down there. And to the point that most of them will never name the people that are there, because they're still there. They're still very much in power, and there's no protection. And that's a fear, you know, and it's something that even when I first came forward, I didn't even share as much of the story as I share now, because I was so fearful of the retaliation, of what they would do to me. And I remember someone saying to me, and someone asking the question, well, why won't you just name, why won't you just out the people that are doing this? And I said, one, because I don't think they'll stop, and I don't think they'll be punished. That's what the system has shown me. Right. And two, like we talked about Anita Hill, we've talked about, you know, you look at the Monica Lewinsky's, and the woman who was asking me, who, you know, was someone who said, you know, I can make a difference. And I said, name me one woman who's outed a predator that has still been able to remain doing what they were doing, to still remain effective. Right. And she couldn't. I said, I advocate for victims. I passed laws in 2017. I had one of the highest passage rate for legislation in the House. I said, I can't stop the advocacy that I do and risk all of that because it's a greater good to out one or two people and their bad behavior when that may not even make a difference.
Right. That's that communal thinking that you were talking about.
Exactly, and that's the weight that we carry. That's the weight that I think a lot of, you know, staffers, you know, lobbyists, and even legislators that we carry. Yes, we know these men. Yes, we still have to work with them. Yes, we still have to figure out how to operate. But also, at the end of the day, we would sacrifice our career.
Right.
And time after time again, what society has shown is the women are sacrificed, and the men, they may be punished if they are at all, but they get to completely keep going. And usually the woman is left as a casualty.
Right.
And when I look at the work that I still have to do in Annapolis, I can't risk that.
Right. I'd like to thank my guests, Brittany Oliver, Nina Smith, and Delegate Angela Angel for joining me for this important conversation and sharing their truths with me. And I want to thank you for joining me, your host, Taya Graham, at the Real News Network.